Okay, so this is the Rhino 6 interface. And if you have older versions, then it should look similar, but this is the latest version. Yep, basically Rhino is a 3D modeler. We have 3D space in which we can use commands to create objects, and those objects can represent your building in a digital space. So when we're looking at Rhino, we'll notice that there's in the beginning 4 windows, I'll call them. They're called viewports, but think of them as windows into this 3D universe that you're creating. So I have a perspective view in this one corner. I have some orthogonal views for the remaining viewports. And when we look at our object, so I'm looking at it in perspective mode, you'll notice that you're looking at it also simultaneously in your plan view and in 2 elevations. So you can model it, your building and your objects with these viewports open. I prefer to have them enlarged. So you could double click the viewport name. It'll maximize these viewports, and you could switch to your other views from these tabs at the bottom. So just know that you're looking at the same object, but just at different directions or different angles. If you want to exit out of that, just double click this viewport title and you'll be back into the 4 segments. So because this is a 3D space and basically you can do anything within it, there are a few parameters that Rhino defines 3D space. So this thing that we're looking here in the middle is our origin point. And you'll notice it in every viewport. So our origin, if you think back to high school math, we have our X, Y, and Z axes, and you can have a point in space using coordinates for your X, Y, and Z. So our origin is defined as 0, 0, 0. So our X value is 0, our Y value is 0, our Z is 0. And we could define a point in space using those coordinates. So just to discuss this little thing here, our red line is going to represent our x-axis. So anything running in this direction will be in our x. And you could also see in the bottom left corner that that's also visually representing it. Our green line is our y-axis, and it doesn't appear here, but we'll have a z-axis perpendicular to this plane. And something else I want to point out is at the bottom, very bottom left corner, we have 3 values. Each are going to represent a point on your X, Y, and Z coordinates. So wherever I'm moving my mouse is where it is currently in 3D space. So you could see it's on 3,000 units in the X direction, 2,300 approximately in the Y, and 0 in the Z direction. So when you're creating your objects, be aware that this is how your cursor is going to be locked onto your 3D space. So as you can see, my Z coordinate is not changing. It's only my X and Y. So my cursor is locked basically to this X and Y plane, unless otherwise changed, which we can do with our commands. Okay, so we can create our objects in several ways. I'll use a line command, for example, and we'll get into commands later. I'll just demonstrate this. But we can use our coordinate system, or we can use values to determine the length. So what I mean by that is in our command prompt up here, this is how we know how to execute our command. Whatever's in bolded is the instructions for what we need to do. So it's asking for a start of a line, which I could simply click anywhere, and I'll do that. And our second instruction is to select the end of line, which I can click. And so that's very manual, but we want to be precise with how we're creating our objects. So instead, I'm going to use coordinates, and I'll start at my origin, which I can use 0, 0, 0, and these represent our x, y, and z. So I'm typing this into my command bar at the top, 0, 0, 0, which represents x, y, and z. And as you can see, if you're following along in your Rhino, that it's now locked into this position. And so I could press enter or click to execute this start of line. And now I could, just like before, click another location, looking at my values here at the bottom to kind of gauge where it's located, or I could be specific again and insert a value into our command bar. So I can insert another coordinate. So I will make a point somewhere on our x-axis. So I will type in maybe 500, comma, we're not gonna have any, we're not gonna have this in the y-axis, so this will be 0. You can see that's already sort of locked, and you could specify even further saying that our z-axis will also be 0. So that's, once I click, there, I've got my line. I'll start off again from the origin. So I've typed in 0, 0, 0, enter. And this time I'm going to add a value that will represent the length of our line. And so I'll type 500 again, but this time you'll notice that it's sort of locked to a radius. So we have the freedom to determine the angle for our line. And I'll just select it like that. So there essentially are 3 ways to create your objects through a command. We can manually click within the 3D space, and that's not that accurate, but we could gauge the angles and all that. We could use our coordinate system, which is very precise, by choosing specific points in our 3D space using the X, Y, Z coordinates. And in some commands where we can define the value of a length. So, yeah. What else? So let's look at some basic commands. We have our curves, surface, and solid tabs at the top. And these are good to just sift through and see what is available. So if you're thinking you want to make an outline of something, you can go to your curves tab, and pretty much what's at the top are the primitive objects. So you've got your line, which is a single segment. You've got your polyline, which is straight segments but chained together. Rectangles, self-explanatory. Freeform is where you can get your curves from, and also some other primitive curves. In our surfaces, that's pretty much the same thing, a little more complex. And then your solids, which if you know the geometry, you'll know what you're looking for. Anything lower pretty much is modifications to something that's already existing. So if I'm offsetting, for example, I'm offsetting a solid's surface a certain amount from that original surface. So these are modifying something that's already existing. So let's take like 5 minutes. I want you guys to just go through some of these, anything that's familiar, and try to create an object. So something else I'd like to mention is that alongside the instructions for your command, there's some words that are within parentheses. And so these modify how the command will be executed. To show you, I'll do two types of boxes. So one, I'll start off as just the default box. So I'm not going to choose any of these special words. I can specify my first corner by inputting values. So I've typed the origin, which is 0, 0, 0. And then this time I'll click somewhere for my other corner. And you'll notice that it's the diametrically opposite corner. And then lastly, our final click or our final input of value will determine the height. So I'll say that I want a height of approximately 300, which if I'm looking to the bottom left corner, I'll notice that there's this value right here, which changes, and that's going to show us how high our box will be. So I could type in 300 to make that pretty accurate and click or enter to execute it. I'll do a box again. This time I'll click for our first corner base. Oh, actually, before I do that, I'll select one of these. So I'll choose 3 point, and the difference now is I'm clicking for first corner, and this time we're not creating the base rectangle. We're actually creating one length of the box already. So I'll click once for one length. This could be our width now for the second click. And our third click will be our height. So the difference between how I made this box and how I made this second box, which was through the 3 point option, is that I have more flexibility in determining all the dimensions for our box. I got to choose the length, the width, and the height, versus here, by default, I'm choosing or I'm creating the base rectangle for a box and then determining the height for that. So I suggest that when you're learning these commands to take a look at what are the options for every instruction to see how you could further modify your objects. So yeah, let's take a good 5 minutes for you guys to explore these different commands in our curve, surface, and solids. And just focus primarily on the first section within these gray lines. So I'll continue doing that myself. Solid. Is there a sphere? Okay. So with my sphere, I'm creating a center, determining the center. So I could click anywhere. Now it's asking for a radius. And say you don't really know the radius, but you know the diameter, then we could select our diameter. And now the input is asking for a diameter value as opposed to a radius. So here I've typed 1200, and now that's our diameter for the sphere. Enter again, we could 3 point our sphere similar to the box. So I'm selecting a first point, which I'm guessing is an edge. Yeah. Our second point will determine the diameter. Okay. And this is determining, oh, okay. So it's locked within 3 points essentially. So this has more flexibility in terms of locating the sphere within 3D space. Chat. Okay, there we go. Is there, someone's asking, is there a way to move the screen around without having to constantly click the mouse button at the top with the options? Screen around without having to constantly click the mouse button at the top with the options. Okay, are you asking about like navigating this 3D space? So what I'm doing here to rotate around is I'm right clicking on my mouse. So this is orbiting, I'm rotating around to pan, which is kind of like you're sliding around. I'd hold the shift button alongside the right click button. So now I'm shifting around as opposed to rotating around a point. I'm not sure if that's what the question was asking. How come my chats are not opening? Participants. There we go. Okay. All right. Okay, so yeah, freeform curve. Let's take a look at one of these control points. So just starting, I'm selecting a point and starting my curve. And you can see that every click makes an anchor for the curve, part of the line. And if you want it sharp, you can choose the yes option. That'll make, it doesn't really look sharper, but that's the whole reason to explore this. And look, there's an undo button. So if you're not satisfied with how this curve is, you could select undo and that will revert the control points that we've created. And so you don't have to start the command again if ever you're like, oh, that's not exactly what I wanted, but this part is good. It's just these last points weren't the best. We can undo that. Okay. Yeah, so in the second half, we'll discuss how to model after a sketch. And one of the students had sent in their sketch, which has a window. So someone is asking, could we show how to make an opening like a window? So we'll get to that in the second half. Okay. And last thing before we get into that exercise, I want to discuss snaps. So here at the bottom, we have quite a few options for snaps. I'll look to ortho, OSNAP, and gumball for today. So what is a snap? We click our ortho, and I'll make a line. Oops, not a lie, but a line. Snaps help us constrain our cursor to an object or a direction. So in this case, ortho lets us snap to 90-degree directions. And it's useful if you're creating a building because you're going to have a lot of right angles. If you don't want that option, you could deselect it and it's now up to you to decide the angle. But I usually keep that on. And in the case that you don't want something that's conforming to 90 degrees, you can hold shift and temporarily deactivates the ortho snap. And when I let go of shift, then it's constrained to our 90 degrees. So that's something that's useful. Our O snap constrains to certain parts of an object. And there's quite a few options. I will show you what end is. So end allows us to snap to corners and ends of our curves. So you can see that I could select my cube or my prism from these corners. Now, if I were to move it and I wanted, say I wanted to move this, I could select this corner and move it to another corner that's located on this box. And this will allow for more accuracy when you're modeling. You're not going to want to move this to the corner without knowing that it's actually located on the corner. Otherwise, it's just a guessing game at that point. Okay. For our near snap, that's locking our cursor to basically any curve or edge. So I could select near on my edge. And my line can now snap to somewhere else on another edge. Some of these are pretty self-explanatory. If you have a point, then it'll snap to a point. So create my line. I don't have any other snaps on, so it's not really locking onto another point of an object, but here we can lock to a point. Our midpoint locks to a midpoint of an edge or a curve. So here it's locking to a midpoint. Centers lock to centers. So if you have something like a circle or a sphere, then that's really useful. And I find this a bit tricky because you'll have to sort of align it close to the edge of it. Otherwise, if you're going to the actual center, it's not locking. So just make sure you're hovering somewhere around the perimeter of a curve or a sphere, and that should lock to the center. Our intersection, wherever there's an intersection, basically, is where we can find it to lock. So I'll just move this, and you'll see that our cursor now is locking to this intersection between our circle curve and our box. Someone have a question?
Yeah. Can you show how you like put the two boxes like together at a point? Because like my laptop won't let me do that.
Okay, so you just gotta make sure that your O snaps is turned on. You'll know that if your options here are grayed out, so select that and it should be available. And how I put the corners together is I use the end O snap, and check that, and when I typed in my move command, I selected one of the corners of our box. We'll select this and simply hover over another corner, and that should lock to this corner of the box. Is that working out for you?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, everything great. Okay. And something to be aware of with the intersection is that you can have a parent intersection, which means physically within this 3D space, they are not intersecting with each other, but visually they are. So if I were to change my perspective to something like that, here I'm making an apparent intersection, which is sort of deceiving. And I want you to be aware of that, because if you end up trying to create your geometry in your building with an apparent intersection, you're going to find that that's not really useful. And lastly, I'll just talk about perpendicular, which is if I'm creating a line, for example, starting at any point, I can make it perpendicular to uh, an edge or a surface. So in this case, it's perpendicular to a rectangle here. So those are mainly the ones you'll be using, and I don't want to have to go over this for the moment. Oh, more people in the chat. Okay. Someone is asking, is there a way to stay on a specific plane? Sometimes when drawing a shape from top view, for example, moves all over the Z axis and is in a proper shape in perspective. Okay, that's a good point to bring up. So I'll go to my top view, and okay, we can see our boxes here. To note, our cursor will, if I were to execute a line command, will stay on Z 0 value. So I'm on the XY plane and it's on value 0 for the Z axis. But if I were to hover to somewhere like my box here, you'll notice that the Z value has jumped up to 300, which is our height of the box. And so sometimes if you're drawing a line segment, like a polyline, and end up accidentally using this as a datum to end your line or start a new line, then you'll notice that uh, it might jump up to the top, and that's exactly what happens in a perspective view. But while you're in your top view, it seems fine, right? So a few ways to lock it into place is when you're executing your command, you want to have project on. So that should project it in the same plane, essentially. So I'm clicking my was prism, and in the previous attempt, it would lock onto the top portion because that's what we see in top view. We see the top of our prism, but project should allow it to stay in the same plane wherever you're starting off. And then I would suggest turning it off when you're done with the command. Or another quicker way, I would say, because then you don't have to select this checkbox, is that while you're selecting your direction, I'll turn my ortho on, while you're selecting your direction, hit the tab key and you'll notice that the line turns white, and that should lock it in the same direction that you've placed it in, essentially. So when I click my prism as my datum, it's not going to lock onto the top. It should stay in the same direction. That works for if you have an angle as well. So I have it at an angle and I'm hitting tab, that should lock into the same direction and the same plane. Okay, and there's one more question that I'll answer or I'll look to. How do I specify height? It looks a little different on my computer. Okay, so if we look to our box example, I'll type in box. So anything that you find within your tabs or as an icon, you can type that into the command prompt and it should execute that command as well. So I'll type in box, hit enter, and that now activated our command. I will do the 3-point option so I can specify my length and width and height. Here, I'll give it a value of 400. So this is a 400 length that I could choose which direction. Again, I'll type in 400. And now either on this side of the axis or this side of the axis. And with my height, which is the last value, I can click or I could type in a value. And you'll notice, yeah. Does that work out? Who was that asked? Does that work out, Jasmine? Yep, okay, great. I think that's, oh, and lastly, I mentioned Gumball, which is a pretty useful tool. So it's this blue, red, green arrow looking thing, and you can do a bunch of translational commands. So you can move, you can rotate, scale your object quite easily and freeform. So I can drag in my x-axis, or I could drag in my y-axis, z-axis. I can click on it to specify a distance, so I don't have to type in move. I could literally just click this and type 40 units, and it'll move 40 units. With these curves, I could change my angle. And with a cube, you can't really notice the difference, so I'll do like that. Or I could type it in as well, 10 degrees. That should move. With our little grip here, I'm scaling in one direction. So I will undo these rotates so you can really see. power of that. So I'm scaling in one direction from the center point of this. So this gumball tool is really useful, and some people say it's inaccurate, but you can make it accurate just by inputting values into it. It's got it. Okay. And all right, so does anyone have any questions so far on anything that I mentioned?
I know you already like answered the question like about how to like put the two objects together at the points.
Yeah.
It worked for one of them, but then it's not letting me do it, even though I have the same things checked off.
Okay, let's take a look at your screen real quick. Mind doing that?
It's on another laptop, but I can share it the other way.
Okay.
Wait, okay. Yeah.
Okay. Great. So, you have your O snaps on, and where is it that it's not working?
Like, you know how you have to do move, right? And then
Yes.
click this and press enter. And then I press like an end or something, right?
Hmm.
And then it doesn't like, there's nothing that says like intersection or to snap it on.
Oh, do you have those snaps turned on at the bottom left corner?
Like here.
Yeah, so you have your end IC is checked, but if you want an intersection, you have to check the INT box.
But even if, okay, so if I did I just checked it off, but it still isn't showing up.
Oh, maybe if you rotate your view, so if you right click and rotate around, you might see. So it appears to be that your box is behind uh, that second box, but it's actually in front of it. So uh, I would suggest turning off the ortho,
Turn off the ortho. Okay. And then just,
or look keep the ortho on, but look at it at a different angle, and then you'll really understand where that object is in three-dimensional space.
like that? Maybe? Or,
Yeah.
okay. So then, um,
Still not
no.
clicking? No. Hold shift while you're doing that. Try that
Shift.
out.
Like
That is
that?
really strange. Okay, let's try moving that second box instead to
Second
that
button?
first box which you're trying to move. Yeah, vice
Okay.
versa.
And then, to one of these points on here.
Mm.
Okay.
Okay, that's really strange. I don't really know why it's doing that.
It's okay. I'll find it online or something.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, don't worry. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll share my screen again. So one of the students had sent in a sketch, and this is their building. It looks like it has a gabled roof, and the roof extends a little past uh, this wall edge in a portion of it, and then it becomes a wall again. And they've created a window. So these are the mullions and the frame to the window. So when you're starting to model, I suggest doing a few good sketches that are axonometric or plan, elevation view, and analyze uh, what are the main parts of your building. So we've got this profile, which looks like we can extrude it. And when I say extrude it, is we're giving our 2D profile or 2D surface a thickness. So we're giving it like that dimension. So we're starting off with this profile, and we can give it a thickness up to this specified point at the back. This looks to I feel like we can make this all one profile actually for a specified distance, and then the rest of the building will be another profile. Key, so I will go to my Rhino space and attempt to kind of recreate that. We're probably not going to look at our top view. That's not the most helpful view, and it looks like our elevation is what we should look at. So in your drawings, you'll have your dimensions and know what the height and width is, but in this case, I'll just freehand it. So I can use my polyline tool, specify this corner, this corner, this corner, this corner, and then work our way around this profile. So I'll type in 0, and now I've locked my cursor to that point. Click, specify each corner, and because I'm snapped with my ortho, I'll use my shift to temporarily unlock that. And I'll just make that point. I'll stop there for now and click enter. What I can do is I can mirror this, so I can make sure that these points are perfectly symmetrical to each other. So I could type in the mirror command, mirror, and so it's asking me to select an object to mirror. I want to mirror this curve, and I now have to make a plane or an axis. So I'm drawing an imaginary line in which it will be flipped across. So I can start from here, just drag it down. Doesn't really matter. So now I have two curves that basically make up the profile of my house. And I could just create a new line from this point to finish off that profile. You'll notice that there's separate curves, but possibly you'd want them to be one curve. So I could select them all and join them together through the join command. So I'll select this curve, this curve, this curve, and now it's one curve, and we don't have to worry about them being broken up in segments. Okay, so I need to extend this a little bit. I need to extend that and then create a wall. So what can I do? What can I do? I can, well, I'll explode this. So explode is basically the opposite of join. Instead of stitching all these curves together, I'm breaking them up into their individual components. So you can see that every straight segment is now its own curve. And what I could do is if I know the dimension of this point to this point, I could extend this line as that dimension. So I could scale in one direction. So I'm typing scale 1D right now. And basically I will select one extent of my line. So here, another extent of my line. And now it's giving me the possibility to make it a new dimension. So this could be, let's say 450 units. I'll type in 450. Now we've scaled our curve from this point to this point until this point to this point. And then from there, I can create a new line that will match this. And so if I want to match to this datum and I don't really know the dimension, we could go to our snaps here at the bottom. There's something called Smart Track, which allows me to reference a point. And you'll see that there's this white crosshair that emerges. And now it's allowing me to lock onto a datum based on that corner. And I could do that with a bunch of different places. So I could lock it here. Now I can lock along this axis, or I could lock it to this corner, lock it along both of these at the same time. So these are quite useful. Okay, how do we move on? This has a little bit of a thickness. So one way we could add a thickness to this is by offsetting. Let me just close this door because it's a bit loud. Okay, so yeah, I can place an offset onto this curve. So it's asking me to select the curves to offset. It's this one I want to, and we'll make it distance. I've selected the distance option, and you can make it like 20. I don't know. If you don't like it, you can retype it in to specify a new distance. Make it 15. Okay. And if I want to execute the same command, I press space, should go back to the offset command, and I could do the same things. But you'll notice that these two are overlapping. So probably we want instead to join these so that they become one curve. Join, and then do our offset command. Something like that. Okay. I want to add another line here. Finish that profile off. And it looks like we'll continue with this profile. So I could do the same offset or join first. So I'm to add multiple elements to a selection, I'm holding Shift. If you want to remove, hold Control. I'm adding these and I want to join them. Join, and they're all together, and I could offset them as one curve now. And by default, it's put to whatever we've specified this dimension, so it's at 15, and that's fine. Okay, so our profiles are nearly there. It's just they're intersecting at each other, and so it's not going to extrude nicely. There's this command called trim. So I'll select the objects that are intersecting each other and hit yes. Now we can sort of cut them off, anything that's overlapping. So I could click this, I could click this, the one that's extending past, and probably this as well. Space or enter to execute the command, and we'll do the trim command again with this, just this section. So trim, and since I've already selected the objects, it's asking me to cut it, so I could do that. Now we basically got our profile. To make it nice and neat, join all these curves. And now you have two beautiful curves like that. From this point forward, we can exit our front view and look to something like our perspective. I'm rotating around it to see, okay. And now we can extrude it, which, as I mentioned, give it some dimension or a thickness. So I'll type in extrude curve. And you'll notice there's a bunch of different options depending on what type of object and how you want to be extruded. So for curves, use extrude curve command. For surface, use extrude surface, extrude curve. So we want to select all the ones that we want extruded, enter, and now we're specifying the distance. And in this case, we'll just do that small portion at the front. So that looks something to be about this distance. I could type in 180. That'll make it more accurate. Someone's saying something in the chat. Let me take a look. Wait, how did you make it upright from being in the top view? Yeah, somebody already answered. I was in front view. So as I mentioned before, our top view wasn't the most appropriate choice to start modeling our building because we have a profile in our elevation view that we'd like to extrude. So instead of starting everything on top, decide which is the best orthogonal view to begin. And so I began it in the front view. And so when we look at it in perspective, it's already upright in our ZX plane. Or you could choose to do your right view, which is also an elevation. It's going to be 90 degrees in a different direction. Okay. How do you add texture and materials? Okay, so I won't cover texture and materials today. If Tess is around, you should be able to jump into her Zoom link and ask her about that. I'm doing just the basics, like this modeling stuff. Okay, and then the second half of our building, we could use this profile again, or actually this profile, which I might have to offset it again to get the right amount. So I'll do that. I'll head back into my front view and offset. And this time we're going to offset it outside, 15 units. And now we have two profiles that match our beautiful gable profile. And what I'll do is I'll move it to this portion so that it begins after this wall. So I can move this, and because I have my O-snaps on, it's really easy to select this corner and move it to the opposite corner right there. And now that we have it in the correct location, we can extrude our curve again and specify the distance, which looks to be something like this based off the sketch. I don't know. You'll need your dimensions to find that out. So 800 and enter. It's cozy. So right now, I based it off one profile just to make this tutorial quick. But when you're creating your building, I want you to think about it as if you're building it in real life. It's not going to be this one object. You're going to have a roof, which is separate from your walls, which is separate from your floor. So when you're thinking about creating your profiles or making your shapes, you'll want to have a unique profile and an object for each building element. So in this case, I would, for my actual project, make a floor profile, make a wall profile, and a roof, which are separate from each other. That way you have more flexibility in modifying these elements, but that's how it would be constructed in real life anyway. All right. This chat thing is really annoying. It just doesn't show up for some reason. Okay, some people are leaving. And lastly, let's just make this little wall here and then the wall at the back, and we'll call it a day. So we have this profile. Yep, we have this profile here. Let's say it disappeared somehow and we forgot about it and we're already a good amount of time into modeling. We can recreate this border. It's really simple. We're just duplicating the edge. So I could type in dupe, which is a prefix for a few different commands. Dupe is just short for duplicate. And so we could duplicate our edge, our border. We could duplicate layers, which I haven't spoken about, but a few things we could duplicate. So in this case, I want to duplicate an edge. So we could select these edges on our model and it'll start to highlight. And once you've recreated the profile, you can click enter. And now our curve has been created based off existing geometry. And now I could extrude it to make a wall. Let's say your thickness is that 25, which is a really thin wall. Don't make your walls that thin. Otherwise you'll be cold. And okay, we need this kind of cross profile. So let's see, what is one way we could do it? Yeah, I could literally just outline this cross. So head back into my front view, and in order not to prevent anything from sticking to an object that's not in the same plane, I'll type project line or polyline. Let's do polyline. You know what? A better bet is actually just to make 2 lines, one from the top to the bottom, and another one that's your horizontal. And looks like I need to select my near snap in order for that to lock on. And then from there, to give it dimension, we could offset. We could just offset this curve. So type offset, and you'll notice that it's going on one side, but there are options. There are options that we could choose, such as both sides. So I'll click that, and we'll see that it's now offsetting on both sides. And this is a bit thick for our frame, so we could change the distance. Let's say it's half. So now it's going to be originally what our distance for our walls are. So I could do that for this line, space if it's the same command you made previously, and I could do the same for that line, but I have to click options. Voila. And now I just have to add some curves here to close off our profile. I don't need these anymore, these little crosshairs, so I could delete that. And line, just close this up. And this could be a polyline since it's 2 segments.
Can you also show us how you did the wall again? Like how you closed up the walls? And
This one over here at the back?
yeah, that one, and also like the thickness of the wall.
The thickness of the wall. Okay, so I'll delete this. And we have our profiles for our curves, which they haven't been joined. One way to select, so window select is when you drag your cursor and you're holding it. And there's 2 types of window selects. You'll notice that if I drag left to right to left, it's a dashed border. So anything that intersects with this border will be selected. But if I'm selecting from left to right, the border is continuous. And so objects that will be selected have to be entirely enclosed into this border. So this is using the left to right selection is really useful when you have a bunch of objects together, like my curves, and I just don't want to have to select them individually. So I just dragged from left to right. And because they're all enclosed in this box and my solid geometry is not, it's not fully enclosed into that selection box, is not going to be selected. So I have my curve here, which I will join for safe measure. So it's now one curve. I use the extrude command, extrude curve. That will give us a thickness to our profile. Yeah, so I'm here in my instructions, which is bolded, extrusion distance. I just need to specify a thickness for this wall. So in this case, I'll make it like 200, which is super thick compared to the rest of the model. But if you're not happy with this thickness, just input another value and it should overwrite it. Oops. Oh, or you have to delete it actually, and then type in the proper dimension. Does that help? I'm guessing that's a, I'll just say it's a yes. And then we'll close off this curve with a polyline, and I need my intersection snap checked on. Otherwise, this curve and this edge will not allow me to snap to. Yeah, voila, there we go. So we'll do the same process where we take all these curves and trim them so that we have a nice enclosure, I'll call it. So I'm holding Shift and I'm selecting all the lines that are part of my profile. Once those have been selected, I can go back to my trim command and select anything that's overlapping. And I'm doing my window selection, so I'm dragging right to left in this case. And hit enter when you're all good and done, and do join because we love a closed curve that's all connected. Okay, and then the same process, except this time I'll go to a different viewport. So I could double click on my viewport title to go back to the 4 segments. And now that I'm in perspective, I'll know how the thickness will look like. So I can type in extrude curve again, specify a distance. I'll say this is 20 and click enter. And then now we've got our frame. And you would just create a profile for your glass that would be intersected in between these frames. But yeah, pretty simple to get this model. It didn't take too long. It didn't require a lot of thinking. We just have to be aware of what view we should start off with. So we shouldn't start off with top view because our profile is located on our elevation. And that way we can create our building through extrusions. I don't think anyone else had a sketch, so this is the end of it, guys. Now somebody's asking, how did you close up that wall again? Or did we answer that? Can Raju verify if I've answered that or not? Figured it out? Okay, good. So does anybody have any other specific questions related to their model that they want me to just go over quick? So you're having a trouble or difficulty with something. Nope. Okay. Well, that one person, what's the channel? Okay. Yep. So I will send this recording to June, and she'll either post it on D2L or I'll place it onto our, what is this? Our tutorial link. I'll show you that quick. So we have links to our tutorials weekly, and in the second tab is where you can view previous tutorials and a bunch of different programs. So most likely it'll be here, and we'll say it's like Intro to Rhino Revisited, and you can view these on YouTube. So anytime at your disposal, you can look at it. Yeah, so somebody asked how to add textures. I mean, I'll just do that because she asked the question and I'm sorry if she left. So if you want to add a texture for your rendering, I'm going to right click this viewport and go to render view. So these options are just different ways to display your model. Ghosted allows you to have x-ray vision and look past this surface and see what's beyond it. In our render view, I don't have any textures applied to it. It's just a default white texture. In our materials panel, if you can't find this, you can right click or select options gear and choose the material panel. Also, I wanna talk about the help panel because that's really useful and I use it a lot too. If you're doing a command, say the box command for an example, it'll give you information on how to do it to a T, like perfectly, and it'll discuss the different options and visualize that for you. So this is really useful. I suggest you have that on if you're still wondering how things work. So as you type in your commands, this will automatically update and let you know the information if this is on. And if you can't find this, again, select the gear bar and have this help part checked on. So back to our materials. This is our material palette. As you can see, there's nothing here. So I could click this add button, and there's a few options. These are templates for different types of objects. So glass is see-through, gem has a bit of color to it, paint is like a flat material. But in most cases, I would go to the material library that Rhino has, and you could select materials from there. And they've got it's quite extensive. So if I wanted to add like a wood texture, I go to the wood section, and from here, it's you having to select one, open it, and see if you visually you like how it looks on your model. So I could choose birch, example, open, and now our birch is loaded into our material section. There's a lot of parameters to adjust, and I won't go through that right now, but simply a lot of these materials take an image as its texture. So if I click on this, this is essentially what we're mapping onto our object, is this image of a piece of birch wood. How do we do that? When we right click our material, we have 4 different procedures. We can assign it to a specific object that is selected. We could assign it to layers. Actually, it's only 2 ways, to an object and to a layer. And here I'll just select an object in which we want to place it onto, say this part. Did that do anything? No, it didn't. So I'll select this before I try to apply it. Right click and assign to object. And now we have my material placed onto it. If you have layers already defined, which are, think of them as folders in which you have specific elements, and you can control whether they're turned on or visible or a different color. There's so much you could do with layers, but say I have a wood layer with all my elements that are supposed to be wood, and I'll place these 2 objects into this layer by using this bottom drop-up menu. Currently it's on default, but if I were to select wood, now it's in my wood layer. And just to show you how it works when we assign to layers, so I right-clicked my material, clicked assign to layers, and chose wood. Voila. And the good thing about assigning to layers is that if you were to make an object within that layer, the material is already assigned to it, just like that. So you don't have to worry about selecting it again, selecting this, and going to your material, right-clicking, and assign to object. It's already done automatically. And if you don't like that, if you want to switch your material, it's easy. Right-click, assign to layers, and you could uncheck that or assign a different material to it. And that should automatically update as well. Okay, so I hope the person who asked that question is still here. Otherwise, whoever knows her, let her know that she could watch this video later. How do you make the inside diff? Oh, there's quite a few questions actually. How do you know when to use extrude curve versus surface? Well, yeah, I can't use extrude. Well, yeah, extrude curve is for curves and extrude surface are for surfaces. So I'll show you what a surface would look like. I just made a rectangle, and I'll type, is it planar? No, sorry. It's planar surface. So I've created a surface, And you'll know it's a surface because in your properties tab, if you select an object, the type is surface. And here I'm selecting my curve. It's a closed curve. They're different things. So if I were to type extrude curve on my surface, it's not going to select. It's only going to select curves. If I type extrude surface, it's going to select my surface and not any curves. So that's how you know the difference. Same option, same operation, same concept. It's just the type of object in which it will extrude. And we have another few questions. Is there a way to break it apart in order to show sections? Like, is cutting through the building a thing, or would we have to build specific parts to create a section? Good question, good question. We have something called a clipping plane. Type in clipping plane. And that allows me to create this temporary like cookie cutter of our model. So I'll do a vertical one just to show you this. So I can make a rectangle that's vertical that will cut into our building, just like that. And so as I move this, if I have my gumball tool on, if I move this, you'll see that it's making an automatic section. And then you could create your drawings from this clipping plane. Make sure it's hidden. So if you type hide or you put it in a new layer and hide that layer, then it won't be visible. And a few other things related to clipping plane is that in your properties section, there'll be these two new buttons that appear. Clipping plane. It'll determine where in your viewports it's applied. So as you can see in my front view, because it's not checked on, it's not going to clip this within this view. So I'll click front, and now it's applying essentially. And if I don't want that to show up, then I'll just uncheck it, and I'll see whatever my model is without a clipping plane in front of it. Okay, and well, there was one more question. I'll answer that. How do you make the inside different? I don't know what that means. Can whoever asked that question specify what they mean by inside for texture? Okay, so for texture, that means we'd have to have, how do I explain? We'll have to make sure that it's a different object. So in this case, let me just delete my clipping plane. This is all one object. So the texture is going to apply to not only this outside surface, but the inside. We want to make sure that it's a separate object. So you can create a surface, you can create another object that represents like a wallpaper. Think of it like that, a wallpaper or a layer of paint that is separate from the rest of your objects. So how can I do that? I could, let's see, this extract surface, right? Yeah, so I extracted a surface, meaning I specified one of the faces of this object, and there's many faces on the outside, on this perimeter edge, on the other perimeter edge, and on the inside. So I could use extract. It's different from extrude. It's extract surface. And I'm selecting a face, or I could select multiple faces. And this will now create two new objects, which are surfaces based off this extrusion that we've made. And a few things to note, this is no longer considered an extrusion. It's a open poly surface. So that's different from your closed extrusion here because we have now these iso curves that appear. If I delete that, you'll see that it's been separated from the rest of the model. We're not creating a new face where it's like we're slicing it out. of what this existing geometry is. So that will help in terms of applying textures to your inside faces. So this will be different from an outside